Hey, team players. Today we're going to be breaking down the Tennessee Titans from the lens of fantasy football. And the reason we're doing the fantasy football breakdown this way is because we need to know how the teams are going to be using these players to get a much fuller picture than just looking at stat lines from year to year. So the number one thing that needs to be addressed with the Titans is they have the worst, by a degree of magnitude, offensive line in the NFL. And last year, Henry carried the ball the most times in the NFL. He actually done it 3 of the last 4 years. He was third in rankings of yards after contact per carry, getting nearly 2.5 yards after being hit. The problem is this year, he's going to be hit more in the backfield than he ever has been before. Is he a freak talent? Yes. Do I believe that you should invest in someone on their upside in fantasy football because if the upside hits, that's how you win? Yes, because I also believe in taking run CMC. It's the exact same situation, just a much smaller human being. Henry is a huge, huge tank of a man. My fear with this team is that if they give up on Tannehill and looking at their schedule, it doesn't exactly start off super kind to them. At New Orleans is a very hard place to start the season. Then hosting the Chargers. Cleveland's probably a nice one, but then hosting the Bengals. You could start 1-3 in that stretch and then really be starting to be looking at, should we be playing the rookie? And we saw last year that when the Titans played a rookie, now Grant, Lake Willis was an incapable rookie. I don't believe they failed twice in that department. When they played a rookie, he became one of the best running backs in the NFL. So there's an argument there that Henry is worth the end of the first round pick. I get it. He's King Henry. But I believe in the world of fantasy, he's much more likely to be the name that broke than to be the best running back in the NFL again. I just believe that's the likelihood of where we're at with King Henry. And you have to start the show with him because he's the most important player in the state of Tennessee.
So when we think about Derrick Henry here, one of the issues that I have for him is maintenance. I've said it when we talked about Derrick Henry before. Is when he takes on some of the hardest contact of any player. You said,
he delivers it.
Like you said, he got 2 yards after being hit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were many times last year, and and I said this in our episode about Derrick Henry before. I'm going to say it again, but there were a lot of times last year too that he was put down when he got hit, and that was what we haven't seen from him in the past. So he's been playing a little while now.
8th season of Tennessee.
He's got a lot of wear on the tires. But there's a lot of good things about Derrick Henry, too, particularly if you can get him in the second round. A couple of these good things go like this. From week 4 to week 9, he rushed for over 100 yards in every single game. From week 14 to week 16, rushed for 100 yards in every single game.
That's your playoffs.
And the last week of the season, because he was out this week 17, he rushed for over 100 yards in the game. 12 of his 13 touchdowns last year came in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at it, we see 185 yards in the red zone from Derrick Henry. He had 1,500 yards last year, so that means he accumulated 1,300 yards somewhere else on the field. Ryan Tannehill, 10 touchdowns in the red zone. DeAndre Hopkins, last year when he was in Arizona, wasn't much of a red zone threat for the Cardinals. They didn't really get to the red zone that much, but when they did, it was James Conner's game.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at this and you say, well, Hopkins is going to hurt Henry. No, he's not.
No.
Absolutely, he will not. Hopkins is going to make the choice of taking Henry, I think, a little bit easier. One of the things I would caution on with DeAndre Hopkins is we have seen a lot of really talented wide receivers go to Tennessee and die.
Yes.
Statistically, not actually. Randy Moss has gone there.
Mm-hmm.
Julio Jones has gone there. We saw Robert Woods go there. Not in the same realm as the other two, but still.
You also saw how much A.J. Brown exploded leaving.
We saw A.J. Brown moving from Tennessee. And so Tennessee isn't this wide receiver friendly place when these veterans come in.
Mm-hmm.
And Hopkins is an elite talent. I can't take that away from DeAndre Hopkins at all. But going back to Derrick Henry is used in the red zone almost exclusively. Even in the year that Donta Foreman was there, he still had 8 touchdowns in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Tennessee Titans can get to the red zone, Derrick Henry will continue to score touchdowns because I don't think it's going to come otherwise on the field. He might break off a 50-yard run, but I unless that's within 50 yards of the end zone, I don't think he would score a touchdown there. And then if he were to break off a 50-yard run, they're taking him out of the game. He's not staying in after a 50-yard run.
Mm-hmm.
He's not staying in after a 30-yard run or a 40-yard run.
Yeah, no one does.
And then if he doesn't score, that's really going to hamper his upside there. But taking him in the second round, after guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown have been taken at wide receiver, like Devonta Adams might be taken at wide receiver as well. If you've already taken a wide receiver, let's say you take Cooper Kupp in the first round, you take him 4th or 5th overall. Joe, you don't like Cooper Kupp at that value at all, but that's kind of what the ADP is throwing out.
And it's wrong.
If you take Cooper Kupp, then I think that you have to take Derrick Henry in the second round if he's there
You'll lose.
you. But it's not going to go out. It might not go out well for you because there's a lot of injury maintenance concern for those two players. Now, when we go and talk about DeAndre Hopkins, DeAndre Hopkins is drafted around wide receiver 21, which falls around the 5th round, 6th round of fantasy leagues.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at his numbers on a year-to-year basis here, we're just going to go to Arizona last year because that's where he was. And granted, he didn't play a lot of games in Arizona last year because of the suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Within the 20, he was targeted 17 times, caught 11 for 3 touchdowns. Let's look at history. Says that in 2020, he was 115 receptions for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. The last time that he got over 10 touchdowns was 2018 with Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're looking at it and you're looking historically at a player that can put up yards, but when push comes to shove, it's not scoring a lot of touchdowns. So his ADP at that range makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're talking about Tennessee. Tennessee is primarily a run-first team, pass second, and it's a distant second at that.
Well, compared to the rest of the league, so they ran the ball basically 50% of the time. That's 10% more than league average, and that's a massive amount in the NFL when you're looking at it. So the other issue that the Titans have is Burks, I do think, will develop into something. I think that he'll be fine. And I think that with Hopkins coming, Burks' value is going to keep plummeting. One of the things you mentioned with Hopkins and reading those numbers is he doesn't play a full season anymore. He is one of these guys who is prone to take we could play through it injury and not. That's one of the Hopkins things he's known for. So when you look at this overall, I believe Hopkins is actually going to help Burke in a fantasy perspective dramatically. Because I think there's a very good chance Burke still leads the team in targets. Granted, it's probably going to be about 110, but still leads the team in targets. But you get better value for him because he actually will be cheaper. And that's one of the things that Burke's overall the whole season has been slept upon. Tannehill is playing for his career. And in general, as long as you have a little bit left in the tank, those kind of motivated guys produce. I think Tannehill at quarterback 31 is asinine. I'm not saying he's one of the 12 you should be drafting, but he's certainly not 31.
Well, the issue there, Joe, is that Will Levis is I think their quarterback of the future. They were talking about. I mean, Malik Willis sucks.
Yeah.
The Tennessee Titans should have beat Kansas City if they didn't have Malik Willis in that game last year. But going back to Hopkins, because he's the player that really matters in this conversation, as does Burks. last year, he was out the first 6 games because of the suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you needed him the most in your fantasy playoffs, he was out again.
Mm-hmm.
Week 16, he was targeted 10 times, caught 1 ball. And he played Tampa.
The Arizona quarterback situation is pretty bad.
It was pretty bad, but prior to that, he was having 7 receptions, 4, 9, 10, 4, 12, 10. So there is a very good possibility that he could return to those 10, 12 numbers.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he's being drafted here is because of the injury concerns, because Tennessee isn't a pass-friendly team. If he's my wide receiver 3,
that's okay.
Into the season,
live with that.
Which, if he's being drafted in the 5th round, he very well likely should be your wide receiver 3. I'm pulling up a draft here on Sleeper that I did last night. This is a 12-team PPR redraft here. And DeAndre Hopkins went right after Calvin Ridley.
See, that's asinine to me.
And this is after the video.
There's no way that you can even try to say any way. Even if you think Ridley hates football and never wants to play it again, there's no way you could say that Hopkins is anywhere near the realm of Calvin Ridley.
A week ago, the way this shook down was Calvin Ridley was drafted at the 4-3, and DeAndre Hopkins was drafted at the 5-1.
So you're seeing Hopkins jumping up now that he knows his landing spot.
And in PPR, you're seeing, or in a half PPR. So some leagues do half PPR.
Mm-hmm.
One of my leagues does that as well. Yesterday, Calvin Ridley went 3-2. DeAndre Hopkins went 4-7. The team that had DeAndre Hopkins also went with Tyreek Hill, so they're probably not going to have a wide receiver at the end of the year. And then Patrick Mahomes and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go to this 12-team redraft for the team that had DeAndre Hopkins. They already had Diggs and Amon-Ra. They went with Breece Hall and Rachaad White as their running backs. I wouldn't recommend that.
Mm-hmm.
But DeAndre Hopkins sitting there as their 3rd wide receiver. Calvin Ridley, the team had Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, 2 rookies, and then Garrett Wilson and Ridley. So there's a lot of upside to taking DeAndre Hopkins in the 4th and 5th round.
See, I can't agree with that.
In the 5th round, I feel like there is, if I'm looking at all the wide receivers in the 5th round.
The 5th round, it makes sense. Or earlier than that, it does not.
If you're looking at the wide receivers in the 5th round, typically speaking, you're having DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Chris Godwin, and Marquise Brown.
There's a lot of ugly there.
Marquise Brown's situation sucks.
So does Moore's.
Chris Godwin's situation sucks. DJ Moore looked good on the field the other day. Christian Watson.
Quarterback can't get him the ball.
Christian Watson is spotty at best.
But let's stick this with the Titans. So when we look at this team overall, we have a situation where they're going to be running the ball because that's who they are.
And Burke's getting in an 8th round.
And Burke's going to continue to drop now that Hopkins is there. He was an 8th rounder when he was the clear number 1. Now he's the number 2, who still might end up winning and becoming the number 1. But right now he's the number 2. Also, one of the things to note for all the people looking at Hopkins, the contract that Tennessee gave him was very similar to Odell Beckham's in the sense that it's a 1-year prove it or you're out type scenario. And there's kind of an incentive to get rid of him as soon as you know he's not the guy. And Hopkins himself already propensates that. I think the more and more we discuss this, Burke is one of the values of the fantasy drafts that people are going to overlook time and time again for all the reasons we said, which are true. Bad offensive line that can't do pass protection. Team that doesn't throw the ball a whole lot. And when they're in the red zone, it's going to Henry. All of that is true.
So here's the issue here.
But you're still getting a guy who's going to get 100-plus targets in the 8th round, which is very hard to get.
When you look at Treylon Burks, where he's being taken, these are the players that are sitting right around him. Juju, Njigba, Addison. People love Addison. There's a lot of upside in that offense. Quentin Johnston, a lot of upside in that offense. Brandon Cooks, we love Brandon Cooks. Kadarius Toney, we're down on. Gabe Davis, we're also down on, but who knows there. Zay Flowers, He looked good,
but he's not going to end up in that group when it's all said and done. Burks is going to plummet now that Hopkins is there and the thing readjusts.
And if he continues to plummet, I would have him over Elijah Moore, Thielen, Sutton, and Lazard.
Mm-hmm.
So he falls right there in that 8th, 9th round where these guys are typically getting drafted. He's falling behind Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, Pickens, Dotson, and Lockett, who
Mm-hmm.
have a degree of upside to them. Michael Thomas, who we don't know about. Jordan Addison and Smith and Jigba, both rookies. And Quentin Johnston, another rookie. So because of the season that he had last year, he's falling with these rookie wide receivers
Mm-hmm.
In redraft leagues. And it's just, there's a good chance that he could perform, but because they utilize Derrick Henry so much, especially in the red zone, the opportunities that Burks would have are going to have to come outside of the red zone. And I'm just not sure that Tennessee is going to pass it enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's one great thing about the Tennessee offense, and this is a testament that I think the rest of the league should do. They don't do RPOs. When they call a running play, they run the ball.
It's true.
It makes the team much better, but it does take away those very cheap receptions that some receivers like Deontay Johnson have made their living on. So, Bob, you have any final thoughts here on the Titans as we conclude this episode?
The Titans are a team that I'm probably not drafting a lot of players from. There's not many players to draft. There's only about 4. You might say, oh, Tajay Spears, if you take Derrick Henry as your handcuff. He really has zero value because nobody in this offensive line could do what Derrick Henry does.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so we saw Deontay Foreman on the Titans a couple years ago when their offensive line was a slightly better, you would say.
Well, what? By default, it had to be.
He didn't do as good as Derrick Henry did. And you saw what Deontay Foreman did on Carolina last year, and he performed very well to get another contract with another team with Chicago. And so there is minimal value drafting backups from Tennessee. We saw what drafting wide receivers from Tennessee did last year after they got rid of A.J. Brown. Robert Woods sucked. Treylon Burks wasn't good. The whole situation was bad, and the only player worth owning is Derrick Henry. If you're taking Derrick Henry, ESPN says that he's going to go off the board at 9. That's a little bit too high. In standard leagues, yes, I see a 9 as being a very real possibility, but I'd rather have Saquon over Derrick Henry. There's a very realistic possibility that you can have Saquon and Derrick Henry. And at that point in time,
Henry is your number 2 is fine. I just don't like him as my 1.
If you're taking Henry and Saquon, go for it, because that is probably going to give you a lot of points. And then figure yourself out at wide receiver. You could take Calvin Ridley in the 3rd round. You can take just DK Metcalf in the 3rd round, and you'll be perfectly fine as long as those 2 stay healthy.
That's right.